We're in the second Cold War, and this is part of it.
What was the biggest when you're doing this project in the Cold War? What were like the biggest miscalculations that people were making? Were they too suspicious of the other side? Were they not suspicious enough? Were they like too concerned about basis and or
I don't
what
know.
were they missing?
I need to think more about that because I think there are probably all sorts of things. And also, it's impossible to know the right thing to do. And then afterwards, when it pans, you go, well, that was a mess. It's hard to know. But I think it was probably a terrible mistake when Eisenhower thought, here's the Supreme Command, Allied commander of World War II, who knows all about hot wars, doesn't want to do that. When the United States deposes Mossadegh in Iran in 1954, I could see Eisenhower's view is, hey, we're just deposing one guy and we're going to avoid the Russians taking oil fields here, etc. And he thinks that's a better trade-off. Well, the Iranians have never forgotten that. They're furious to this day. And wouldn't you be if you're Iranian? Mossadegh was democratically elected. Or another time, actually in Vietnam, we didn't want to we didn't push the South Vietnamese to hold elections because we knew Ho Chi Minh would win. He was the only national figure in Vietnam. So the United States is all about free elections. The Vietnamese could have run a free election and Ho Chi Minh would have won. That was our assessment that he would win. Okay, well, if you're for free elections, it means you don't get the outcome you want. And I wonder if that wasn't a terrible mistake because the Vietnamese actually can't stand the Chinese. So they were always going to be a counterbalance to the Chinese. But due to the McCarthy era, we'd purged all of our China experts, all these children of missionaries who knew a great deal about China, less so about Vietnam, but at least it's a related cultural group. So we had gotten rid of all that expertise in the McCarthy era. So we're running blind in Asia.
What you just mentioned about the fact that we would curtail what kinds of elections you can hold in these countries. After Germany and Japan surrendered, if they tried to elect another fascist party, we wouldn't have been like, all right, well, that's what you guys voted for. They're in charge now. We would have, you know. And so, why is the principle different in Vietnam?
Because the South Vietnamese would have voted for him as well. We've just been fighting a massive war with Japan and Germany. There's no way we're going to let the Germans or Japanese decide anything initially. But what we did do for both Germany, our half, the West Germany and Japan, is we did our best to set up democratic institutions that within a cycle or two, they're making their decisions, whom they're electing. We are not choosing their leaders. And it was a very generous peace. It was realizing in World War I, ostracizing Germans, ostracizing Russians. It's probably doesn't. You need to bring them back into the family of nations because they're on the planet. They're not leaving the planet. And the generous peace with Germany, look at them. They're the most wonderful allies, as are the Japanese. They're terrific.
During the Cold War, the USSR is constantly funding these communist parties around the world. Um, and these parties are doing like exactly their bidding. Whatever Stalin says, they'll do.
I don't know
Or,
about that.
well, yeah, feel free to clarify. But it doesn't feel like any other country managed to pull this off. There's not like an American party in the French Parliament that does exactly what the president would tell them to do.
No,
How'd they pull this off?
I don't think it's that they did exactly what anyone wanted. What the communists have is a really powerful doctrine for how you go from nothing to something in a failing state, how you start out with a bunch of people on some campus. Mao literally starts out as a junior librarian in Beijing University. So I don't know, he's there with the librarians, I don't know, the ladies, who knows what it is. It's probably guys in those days. And then he's turning these people into cadres and eventually to guerrillas and eventually conventional army. But they have a really good program that works the world over, and it's very effective for taking power within a broken state. It's lousy at producing prosperity thereafter, right? And you look at the Communist Party today, they're really good at staying in power. For a while there, under Deng Xiaoping, it ran in parallel what the economic reforms needed to be to produce wealth and what the party needed in order to be more powerful. But now that's running at cross purposes because for the party to maintain its monopoly, well, all these much more educated Chinese aren't going to be interested in that anymore. And so it's time to lock those people up, and then you're going to have trouble with keeping your economic growth rate going.
Mao dies, and immediately things improve. China experiences this growth trajectory. Stalin dies, and Khrushchev's not a teddy bear, but at least you like cut down the Gulag system. And so it does seem like if you have an especially bad dictator, you do have this sort of regression to the mean, where the next guy is probably not as bad as the worst guy who's ever been in charge of the country. And I wonder if that implies that if we got rid of Kim Jong-un or the Ayatollah or something,
There you go.
the next guy probably won't be as bad.
I don't know, but I think iconic leaders like Mao and Stalin, they were canonized by winning their wars. Stalin, by winning World War II, the Russians revered him for doing that. And they had experienced, every Russian experienced World War II. It was central to their lives to win that thing. So Stalin is canonized for doing that. And Mao, the man who puts Humpty Dumpty back together again when no one else could, and then fights the great powers, capitalist powers, to a stalemate in Korea, he's again been canonized. Whoever comes after them is not going to have that level of prestige. It's just going to devolve. That's period. And then for the successors of Stalin, they were sick of being terrified about whether they're going to be purged. He kept putting bullets in people's heads, like Vladimir Putin. You do this long enough that people are horrified and don't want to have it. They don't want to live that way anymore. So there's that piece of it as well.